Hey, everybody. Welcome to Encounter Grace. I'm Jason McKnight, and I'm glad to be with you, and I'm glad you're with us. We all know that the U.S. court system is slow and creaky and overburdened. And you just think of the high caseloads. A lot of times we hear they get things wrong. And, we can, if we're not careful, we can complain until the cows come home. And yet at the same time, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, it's the worst legal system in the world except for all the others. So, this idea of our legal system, the fact of the matter is that while we think we have some dysfunction, and we probably do have some dysfunction, we have a high degree of trustworthiness and good outcomes. Some incredibly wise and careful judges and clerks and attorneys throughout. And we enjoy in this country the protection of freedoms that are the envy of almost every other country. So, as we try to help thinking Christians think clearly, today we're going to do it about our legal system, our legal environment, and especially what do we think is going to come next over the next 4, 5, 6 years? What's coming down the pike that us regular folks don't know about? Well, to that end, we've invited a good friend and a former guest on Encounter Grace before, attorney Jake Warner, to help us discern and think together. He's an attorney with a national and specialized law group called Alliance Defending Freedom. We're going to talk about that. But Jake, thank you so much for making time in your schedule to join us.
It's a joy to be back at Encounter Grace. It's like coming home. So good to see you, Jason.
You bet you might be sorry you said that. You know what I'm really hoping is that somebody walks by your office and does some faces and stuff.
I do worry about that sometimes. We'll try our best to avoid it.
I think that's great. So, since you're not in the studio, but we're doing this remotely, tell us where you are and how the weather is.
Well, I'm at my office at Alliance Defending Freedom, particularly our Scottsdale office. So I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona, and this is the best time of year to be in Arizona. We can't say that for half the year during the summertime when it's 110 plus for who knows how many days in a row. But right now it is super nice. We're getting highs in the 70s and 60s, and it's really a fabulous time to be in the desert when things start turning green a little bit around here.
Even the desert turns green once a year. What are you taking your kids out on the golf course in the nice weather?
Yeah, that's one of the beautiful things around here. There's tons of golf courses, and the weather gets nice, I've been trying to take the kids out and play a round of golf, and sometimes they hit the golf ball, sometimes they don't. They always come equipped with their bug cages and bug nets, so they try to catch all kinds of bugs. Well, actually, more than bugs. If they see a rabbit, they'll try to catch a rabbit with the bug catcher. So they chase wildlife. They sometimes crawl holes. Sometimes they run over me with a golf cart. So it's a tremendous experience for all of us whenever we go adventure golf.
Adventure golfing, I like that. You know well that in Kinston, we have a thing called Jolf, but I like adventure golfing as an addition to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
joy.
well, Jake, let me lead us right back down to business after we've been out on the golf course together. Um, Tell us what ADF is. What is it that you work for? What do y'all do? And how did you get involved in this? Because you used to practice small town law right here in Kinston.
Sure. Well, Alliance Defending Freedom is the world's largest law firm dedicated to advancing religious freedom, free speech, the sanctity of human life, parental rights, and God's design for marriage and family. ADF exists to advance the God given right to live and speak the truth. And we do that multiple ways. We primarily do it in courtrooms. I'm a lawyer, and I work alongside approximately 90 other lawyers here at Alliance Defending Freedom, and we litigate on these issues. But we have a whole team of communications professionals as well that go to the court of public opinion, and they're writing op-eds and advancing these issues in the public square, and hopefully persuading the American people of the beauty of biblical truth and the importance of protecting some fundamental freedoms that our country has that not every country enjoys.
Mhm. I mean, it really is true. And when you read the news from different countries, you don't even have to go to kind of former Soviet states to see some really frightening hints and events going on in Western Europe and in the UK. It's a little bit weird with freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion and assembly. I don't know that I grew up in Canada. I don't know I fully understood how strong the First Amendment is.
It's one of the strongest protections in the world. There's a number of countries who actually have protections for free speech and religious freedom on a piece of paper somewhere, but it takes vigilance from the people to protect those words on the paper and make sure that they have meaning in law and in courts. And that's one thing that the people in America have done well. We have not only enshrined these rights in our Constitution, but we have been dedicated to preserving these rights. And that's not true for every nation around the world and even Western nations. And you were talking about threats emerging and even Western nations in the UK and other places. And what we see there is that even though they have some of these rights enumerated in their foundational documents, they are not honoring or respecting those rights. And I know Alliance Defending Freedom is representing one person who was arrested for silently praying in a Western European nation. I think it was in the UK,
Mhm.
silently praying, and they were arrested. And that's part of a larger trend of global censorship that we are committed here to countering. Because here we believe free speech is for everyone, and the government shouldn't be forcing people what to say. So we're right to be aware of what's going on around the world, and proactive in what we're doing to them, not just for those who agree with us, but for all people.
Right. It strikes me as I think of this country, the U.S., that not like the First Amendment, like you just said at the beginning, the First Amendment. A lot of people have freedom of speech, freedom of religion on paper. How does it become real in society and in the people's freedom and lives? And it seems like the combination of the law saying it, so the First Amendment is a law, or it's part of our Constitution, so it's legally there, but the judicial system that's strong enough to withstand the pressure from the executive or the congressional lawmakers. And then the third piece that allows freedom of speech to really thrive in our country is not just that it's assented to, not just that there's the legal system, but also the freedom of the press that drives that. It seems like when the press is coerced or co opted, in countries or even in our country, it weakens not only the statement of freedom of speech, but it also weakens that independent judiciary. Is
Sure.
that? I mean, I didn't go to law school. Is that out in left field? Those three pieces all putting together, bringing.
No, those are critical ingredients. Obviously, you have to have the rights enumerated in your foundational documents. That's our Constitution. That's the First Amendment to our Constitution, at least with respect to free press, free exercise of religion, and free speech. But you have to have a people committed to upholding those freedoms. And like you said, it's important to know that here in the United States, we have separation of powers. We have a Congress, our legislative branch, in charge of making laws. We have the executive branch in charge of enforcing laws, and then we have the judicial branch in charge of interpreting those laws. And the judicial branch here is an independent branch. And you got judges appointed for life, which I believe to be a very good thing because it protects them from political pressures that elected officials are often more sensitive to. And they're more freed up to, I think, apply those foundational documents in an honorable and respectful way.
Amen. I couldn't agree more.
More.
How did you get involved with ADF? How long have you been working there, and how did you get involved? And then I want to talk about one of the big cases you've been working on.
Yeah. Well, a lot of folks there watching Encounter Grace know my story. I was a lawyer in Kinston for 3 years with Jimbo and Josiah at Perry, Perry, and Perry. Long before that, I was in the first fellows class at Grace, and during that time, I clerked with Jimbo and got acquainted with what it meant to be a lawyer, to be able to help people in ways that I never knew was really possible through being an attorney. So it was really through my time in Kinston that inspired me to go to law school. I felt like that's where God was calling me after working with Jimbo and um, engaging in criminal defense work for a year or so there. And then after law school, it was so good for Jimbo to invite Ashley and I back. I got married in law school. Then Ashley and I both came back and worked there in Kinston at Jimbo's office, and I got to do criminal defense for a few years, and it was a true joy. I was in jails most every day, talking with men and women who were needing some help and needing a friend, and I was able to hopefully provide both for those folks for a few years. And in many ways, that time prepared me for a lot of what I'm doing now, because we were. When I was a criminal defense attorney, I was protecting people from government overreach at times, particularly when it comes to the Fourth Amendment, protecting people from unreasonable searches or seizures and other things. A lot of what a criminal defense attorney does is ensure that people's rights are protected. And I considered it a high honor to be able to walk through some tough times with folks as a criminal defense attorney for a few years. And then, of course, after that, um, I clerked for Judge Howard in the Eastern District of North Carolina, and that was also a real big joy. I got to work with Stacy there at Grace. It was a joy to work with her, and I learned so much those 2.5 years. I was clerking with the court, doing all kinds of different cases, and really getting a broad understanding of the law, and being able to see cases up front. Most days that we had court, and that was a really fun experience. But during that time, there were new threats emerging that I'd never really seen before. And, when I looked around, I saw in the news that government officials were targeting people for trying to live and work according to what they believe. And those officials were targeting mainly Christian artists, people like Jack Phillips and Barronelle Stutzman, the Colorado cake artist and Washington florist who government officials were trying to punish um, for wanting to create art consistent with what they believe. They want the freedom to promote uh, ideas about marriage consistent with their biblical beliefs, but the government was trying to punish them. They said, no, if you promoted ideas about the biblical view of marriage, you had to promote other ideas that contradicted those views. And these faithful believers in good conscience, they couldn't do that. Although they love and serve everybody, they just can't express every message through their custom artwork. So when I saw that happening, I wondered, well, who's representing these folks? And it turned out it was Alliance Defending Freedom. And that's when I applied for an open position as an attorney here at ADF.
And I can't believe they took you. I wrote you the worst reference letter ever.
I know it was only by God's grace that I ended up here, overcoming the efforts of good friends like you, Jason.
No, that's not true. I did not write a bad reference letter. I don't think you were desperate enough to ask me. But it's really been fun to talk with you personally, as well as a couple times here on Encounter Grace, about your work and about all that has gone on. And I actually hadn't remembered or never realized that you pursued that. You followed a line of curiosity. Now, who's representing these people like Jack Phillips and Barronelle, and how are we going to help them, and how are we going to then help everybody, all the artists, all those with I really appreciated that. I didn't remember that, Jake. Tell us, because you ended up working with Jack Phillips, the Masterpiece Cake Shop guy. Tell us a little bit about that whole case. I mean, it's a long saga. I just finished reading his book, The Cost of My Faith, which was so well written and so winsome and gentle. I really appreciate it and recommend it to folks. How'd you get involved in the case? What was the case? In fact, more than one. Tell us some of that story. Just remind us because it's kind of in our background. Yeah, we remember the cake guy from Colorado.
Well, I met Jack the first week I was a lawyer at ADF. And little did I know, his story drew me to ADF, and I would be representing him for 8 years. But um, uh, let's go back to 2012. It was a summer day, July 2012, and two men come into Jack's shop, and they ask him to create a custom wedding cake that would celebrate uh, a same-sex wedding. And Jack is a devout Christian. He politely told these men, "Look, guys, I serve everyone here. We welcome and serve people from all backgrounds, but I can't create cakes expressing every message, and that's a message I can't express for anyone. So while I would sell you anything in my shop or create another custom cake for you expressing a message that would be consistent with my beliefs, that's the message I can't express for anyone." And after that, the two men stormed out of his shop and ended up filing a complaint with the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, charging Jack with violating a state law. And around the same time that the media learned about what happened, and it turned into a really big deal. And Jack started getting all kinds of hate mail and death threats. There was one guy who called up and said, "I'm at this street and that street, and I'm coming. I know your family's there, and I'm going to come blow your head off."
Mm.
He hung up the phone, and then he called back and said, "Now I'm at this street. Now I'm at that street. Now I'm at this street." And Jack called the police, and the police was there, and we don't know if the guy saw the police and turned around, but that's the kind of stuff that Jack was facing in those early days after the news hit about what happened.
And that was just some guy. Like there was no link to the two men who came in that we know
Not at
of. I
all.
mean, it was just some guy taking matters in his own
Yeah,
hands, as far as we
it's
know.
the guy that heard about what happened in the news. No, it was certainly not anything connected to the two men. Um, but after that, obviously the court stuff started, and Jack went before the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and they ruled that the state could force him to create custom cakes expressing messages that violate his beliefs. The commission punished him. They ordered re-education requirements, reporting requirements, and uh, ordered him to stop creating custom wedding cakes unless he promoted messages that went against his faith.
Did they really really re-education? They said re-education, or is that kind of how we talk about it? But did they
No, I believe it really was that, and that's certainly how
re-educate?
Justice Gorsuch interpreted it when he was calling the state out at oral argument some years later. It was really a re-education requirement where Jack had to train his employees, one of which was his mom, and his mom flatly said, "I'm not going to be retrained," but which is a bit humorous, of course. But um, thankfully, Jack never had to follow through on those things because we appealed up to the Colorado Court of Appeals. But unfortunately, that court upheld the wrong decision below, and so we had to appeal it to the Colorado Supreme Court. Well, this was a pretty new issue back then, and the impact of it wasn't quite as known as it is now. And the Colorado Supreme Court just declined to hear the case. They don't have to hear every case that comes before it, so at that point they just declined to hear it, which left the U.S. Supreme Court as the only opportunity available for Jack to move forward. And you'd think it might be an easy decision to appeal, but it was a hard call because, you know, in Jack's mind at first, he was thinking, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? They not hear my case. Well, they're already not hearing my case. Uh, but then he learned, like, no. The worst thing that would happen is if the U.S. Supreme Court decided to hear the case and then ruled against him. And that crushes freedom for everyone, including people who disagree with Jack.
Hmm.
So it was really a big decision to ask the U.S. Supreme Court to weigh in. Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to hear Jack's case. And in June of 2018, it issued a 7-2 ruling in
Mm.
Jack's favor, which we are so thankful to the Lord for. And we had asked the court to decide both a free exercise issue and a free speech issue. See, what had happened along the way is State officials were really hostile to Jack and his faith. Those who were deciding his case compared him to Nazis and slaveholders, called religious freedom a despicable piece of rhetoric, truly awful comments.
Yeah.
But not only that, during Jack's first case, a religious man went to three other secular cake artists in Denver and requested a custom cake with Bible verses on it. And those cake artists declined, citing their objection to the message. Well, instead of prosecuting those three cake artists like they did Jack, state officials said no, these folks have the freedom to decline to express messages that they disagree with. So when the U.S. Supreme Court learned about all this, it said, no, Colorado, you're discriminating against Jack. You're treating him worse than non-religious cake artists, and you're hostile to him and his faith. So the court ended up throwing out that entire litigation based on the state's hostility towards Jack and his faith. But that left open the free speech issue, right? And it also left open the door for more attacks on Jack. So on the same day, the U.S. Supreme Court actually decided to hear Jack's first case. A local Denver attorney contacted his shop and requested a custom cake, blue on the outside and pink on the inside, that would celebrate and symbolize a gender transition. And of course, Jack said, people at his shop said, we serve everyone, but we can't express every message. That's a message that we can't express for anyone. So the attorney actually called back. What's that?
Can I interrupt there? Just because of that, we serve everyone, but we can't create something that expresses contrary. So that's what differentiates this from the lunch counters of the 1950s with segregation,
100%.
where
100%.
black and white areas of the restaurant and black and white restrooms and so forth, it's the exact same thing you're giving people, and you're just saying, we're going to segregate you. Whereas now we're saying, Jack's saying, oh, I'll serve everyone the muffins that I've already made, the cookies and the coffee that I'm making. But what I can't do is make up a message that I disagree with. And that's where the freedom of speech part is. It's not in the 24 muffins that I've made. I'm happy to get them out the door to everyone who comes in.
Yeah, it's all about the message. It's never about the person. It's all about the what. It's never about the who. And that makes these cases entirely different from the horrible stuff that we think back to in the 50s and elsewhere in our nation's history. These non-discrimination laws, they've served a very important purpose in our country. But what we've seen in recent years is they have been misused to force people to express messages that they disagree with. And that's not good. When the government has that kind of power, it doesn't matter if you agree with Jack and his view of marriage or not. The government shouldn't have the power to force anyone to express things that they don't believe. And that's what Jack's case has been about for over 12 years now. The same attorney that requested the custom blue and pink cake to celebrate a gender transition actually called Jack back and requested a custom cake depicting Satan smoking marijuana. And this attorney admitted that the purpose of this request was to correct the errors of Jack's thinking. So we have officials and people targeting other Americans because they disagree with what they believe. And that's been a really horrible thing that has occurred over the past 10 to 15 years in our nation's history. But the good news is our nation's getting back on the right track with a lot of help from courts being bold and making the right decision. Jack's case went to trial. We lost at trial. The court said that he could be punished for declining to create these cakes expressing messages he doesn't agree with. We appealed up to the Colorado Court of Appeals.
So the gay marriage cakes or the Satan smoking pot cakes?
Well, it was the gender transition cake that went to trial, not the Satan cake.
Okay.
The trial court ruled that Jack could be forced to express that message that he disagrees with. Well, we had to appeal up to the Colorado Court of Appeals, and unfortunately that court affirmed the decision. So that left the Colorado Supreme Court. But in the meantime, as we were petitioning the Colorado Supreme Court to hear Jack's case, we were also representing another Colorado artist, a web designer named Lori Smith, and she owns and operates 303 Creative. Mm-hmm. And she saw what was happening to Jack, and she wondered, could this happen to me? And of course, the answer was yes. So she challenged this unjust law, and we took her case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where in 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that free speech is for everyone, and that the government can't force people to express messages that go against their deeply held beliefs. And after the Supreme Court issued that decision, the Colorado Supreme Court decided to hear Jack's case. And ultimately, we went to argument there this summer. And then in October, the Colorado Supreme Court dismissed this last case against Jack. And he's now out of court for the first time in 12 years. This will be the first Christmas since 2011 that he has not been facing legal action.
He must have just I mean, I know he writes in his memoirs, in his book, about having the grace of the Lord, but he just must have a weight lifted.
Yeah, it was a joy. I was just with him a few days ago at a conference and giving a talk, and it was a joy to be with him. He has such hope in the Lord. He's such a steadfast man. He is just a wonderful client to represent, and a wonderful believer to learn from, as he has faced adversity after adversity inside and outside of court. Yet he has remained faithful to God's calling in his life, and has loved people as best as he's could. And he's been a great example of courage for the rest of us.
I mean, just for fun, what's next for him? More cakes.
Well, hopefully he never sees a courtroom again. That's our hope and prayer.
Traffic.
Even that, we don't want Jack in traffic court either. But we hope he gets back to creating cakes and loving people and doing everything that God's called him to do without any more harassment.
Yeah, right on. Well, Jake, so you wouldn't take me on if I was in traffic court, but you would take Jack Phillips on with the First Amendment issue. So that's because that's what ADF does, is they specifically, as you talked about, the 5 things. Can I ask you to explain a little bit for me about the legal system? What makes it to the Supreme Court? Because they obviously can't hear every person that asks to go to the Supreme Court. How do they choose? And then I have another question that as you were talking, the very beginning of Jack's whole legal trauma was with the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. How does a Civil Rights Commission fit into our legal system? Maybe that's easier to start with and then talk about Supreme Court.
Got it. So in Colorado, it's not like this necessarily in every state. Not every state has commissions, at least the kind of commission that Colorado has, but they have a Civil Rights Commission that is within the executive branch of the government. It's not a court. It's not under the judicial branch. It's actually under the executive branch. And how the law works in Colorado is it funnels any complaints about the violation of a certain state law. They have to go before this executively appointed commission. So the governor appoints, I think it's about 7 people to sit on this commission, and they function similar to a court. Like, you're going to be filing briefs and having a hearing, but you're not necessarily going to have all the protections that you might have in court, or the same kinds of protections that you would have from an independent judiciary. So when complaints are filed there, these appointed officials will make a decision in the case, but then after that, the case can actually be appealed to the judicial system, to the Colorado Court of Appeals. So it removes from the executive branch to the judicial branch at that point. But at that point, you already have fact-finding done, which is a critical part of the case. And sometimes when you have appointed officials or commissions, they might do that fact-finding in a different way than a judge might, who's in the judicial branch. But when you go to the U.S. Supreme Court, I'll move to the Supreme Court now. Like I was talking about with the Colorado Supreme Court earlier, the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't hear every case. There are 10,000 petitions filed on average every year with the U.S. Supreme Court. And that court accepts approximately 1% to 2% of petitions that come before it. So it will have a docket of approximately 70 or 75 cases in a given term, which typically runs from October to June each year. So, so when you have someone that's looking for review at the U.S. Supreme Court, it's a highly unlikely situation that the U.S. Supreme Court will hear the case just based on probabilities. But what you're looking for is this a really important issue in the law that needs development? Is there conflicts in the courts below? Have certain courts been answering the question one way, other courts been answering it the other way? Does the U.S. Supreme Court need to step in? Those are the kinds of things the U.S. Supreme Court looks for when deciding whether to accept a petition. And then when the petition is granted, then there's obviously new briefing. There's typically an oral argument. You don't have like a jury trial at the U.S. Supreme Court. There's nothing like that at all. That's all done before. But what you have at the U.S. Supreme Court is written arguments and then an oral argument, which typically lasts somewhere between an hour and 2 hours now. And then you wait a few months for the decision to come out. You don't find out the decision immediately.
And I mean, that's really, I mean, these justices, the 9 Supreme Court justices, that's a heavy load.
Yeah, it really is. And I think you're talking about earlier, certainly there could be improvements in our judicial system, but we have the best system in the world. I firmly believe that. And I know each of those 9 justices, they are dedicated to trying to interpret the law correctly and to do the right thing. There are going to be disagreements. I'm not going to agree with how every justice interprets a particular law in a particular case, but I know that those justices, they are doing their very level best to find the right outcome. I think especially over the past few years, we've seen a lot of big decisions and a lot of hard decisions that the court has made, and they've gotten it right. And one of those was Jack's case a few years ago, and then obviously the 303 Creative case I mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. Well, ADF must be pleased with both of those. And yeah, and congratulations, Jake. I know, you've had a hand in several things there.
Yeah, it's a joy to represent folks like Lori and Jack, and we're so thankful. Yeah, since 2011, we've had 15 wins at the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're so thankful to the Lord for that kind of success.
Wow, that is fantastic. You actually were in the Supreme Court for one of these, or more than one. I mean, tell me about what that experience is like. Do they have good coffee there? I mean, what's
No, you really can't bring anything into the courtroom with you except maybe a pencil and a piece of paper. But no, I was there for both Jack and Lori's cases, and it's certainly a very solemn environment. You have the justices, and then the lectern is actually very close to where the bench is, where the justices sit. So you're within 8 to 10 feet of the justices, depending on who you're talking to. So it's a very intimate environment when you're litigating before the court. But if you're a client, you're actually not sitting up with the attorneys or at the table. You are sitting in the audience, something you may not necessarily expect. But there's a place for reporters to sit, and court artists, and the clerks for the justices, and a place for attorneys. So anyway, it's a really special place to go to. They actually are just going to be piloting a new system, for a lottery system, for coming to watch arguments. So
really?
if you have folks who want to go listen to an argument, you can do that if you sign up for the lottery and get in there.
I think it would be good. I think that's a far better idea than introducing cameras.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of wisdom in keeping cameras out of the courtroom.
Yeah, but I'm getting old, Jake, and I might be becoming a curmudgeon.
No.
Let's talk about. I mean, we've said that ADF has 15 wins since 2011 at the Supreme Court, and more at lower levels. But you also have several cases right now before the Supreme Court. Let's just bring us up to date on a couple of them that you want to share with us, because I mean, you probably can't tell us everything about all of them, but give us why you're excited about what's going on, or why you are really urgently burdened for what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's one case that I'm involved in that we have pending before the U.S. Supreme Court, and that is the BPJ case. And I, along with my colleagues here at Alliance Defending Freedom, we represent a female college athlete
Mm,
or a former female college athlete, and we're trying to protect and defend West Virginia's law protecting women's sports. Obviously, gender ideology has become a big issue in our country over the past 10 years or so. And we as a nation, we're struggling on trying to find the right balance. How do we protect our people and do the right thing, the fair thing, to honor and respect folks? And West Virginia passed a law that saved women's sports and protected women's sports for females. Males can't participate in women's sports. But that law was challenged by a male in that case, and it went up through the Fourth Circuit, and unfortunately, the courts below interpreted Title IX in such a way that would uh, forbid this West Virginia law that protects women's sports.
mm,
And we're also representing another young high school female student who goes to school with this male that's challenging the law, and you can see the impact on women that this law is trying to protect against. This male has displaced over 200 different girls in sports and done that over 700 times. And our client has been on the receiving end of some sexually inappropriate comments from this male, even in women's private spaces. So this
mm.
is this is a big deal, and this issue is popping up not just in West Virginia, but in states all around the country. In fact, we have another case with this exact same issue coming up from Idaho. That's also a case pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. So the women's sports issue is really a big deal. Are we going to allow laws that respect the biological differences between men and women? We know that men and women are equal, and they're unique. There are things about men that are different from women, and vice versa, right? And the question is, can our laws respect those differences? Because if we don't respect those important differences, it's typically women and girls that get hurt. And that's what we've seen over and over again. So we have a couple of cases at the U.S. Supreme Court on that issue. There was actually a case that was just heard a few weeks ago challenging Tennessee's law that is protecting children from experimental drugs and procedures when it comes to gender
Mhm.
ideology. And it's possible that the court could be holding our cases in the sports context pending how that case is decided. So that's something to look out for. Another case that we have up at the U.S. Supreme Court right now is Childs v. Salazar. It's a case out of Colorado. A lot of cases, it seems, comes out of Colorado. But the state government out there is basically trying to dictate conversations in the counseling room. When folks come to counselors and they're wanting help, maybe they're struggling with same-sex attraction or um, uh, experiencing gender dysphoria. The state is telling these people there's only one outcome that you can choose, and that is um, uh, either further into same sex attraction or further down the road into trying to live as the opposite sex and consistent with your own. So we're representing a counselor who wants to help people achieve comfort with the sex that God has given them, and to uh, develop attraction for people of the opposite sex. Right now, Colorado law basically has a one-way rule that only dictates one outcome in those situations, and that's not right. These people should have the choice to pursue the outcomes that they desire there. Those are a couple of cases. One other case I'll mention is the LM v. Town of Middleborough case. We represent a now high school student, but in middle school, he wore a T-shirt to school that said there are two genders, and the school punished him for that. They sent him home. He had to not wear that shirt anymore. He actually came back with the same shirt on, but had uh, the words "only two" marked out with the word "censored," and that didn't fly either. So he had to
Little
take that
cheap.
off and get punished for that too. And so we are asking the U.S. Supreme Court to rule to hear that case. It was wrongly decided in the circuit court below, and we're hoping that the court will affirm free speech for that high school student in the LM case. So that's a spattering of cases that we're watching. Again, the Supreme Court hasn't said they're going to hear them yet, but we're hoping it will later this term.
Okay, so you've petitioned to be heard.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're still waiting, and the good news is the court has been considering these cases over multiple weeks. So we're hopeful that at some point the court will grant these cases for
Yeah.
review.
Well, and it's that last one, LM versus Town of Middleborough, with the seventh grader with the T-shirt. There are two genders, and then there are only two censored. It's that last case that kind of leads us to, you're probably more thoughtful about more aspects of the cultural discourse in the public sphere than a lot of us are. And what do you see? What trends or what waves do you see cresting and troughing, or are we as I mean, it feels like the bubble has burst on uber progressive, aggressive progressive, and I don't know. I just feel like it seems like in the zeitgeist, it's it's receding a little bit. It doesn't mean that we're all back to 1995 or anything like that. It just feels like it's not as militant, aggressive, and crazy. But maybe I'm missing out on a whole bunch of things because maybe I'm only hearing some things on Twitter or something.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about this without recognizing that there's a new presidential administration that's incoming, and I do think that we're going to see policy shifts at the federal level. We're hopeful that President Trump follows through on some of his promises to protect free speech, to respect parental rights, and to respect the differences of men and women in federal law. So uh, we'll see what happens on that front. But regardless, there are going to be continuing threats from states. We already have heard reports of states' attorneys general uh, uh, promising to double down on their efforts on these issues. And there are really three big issues that we see kind of at the forefront right now for our culture, not just here in the United States, but really around the world. And that is global censorship. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the podcast, but there is a growing tide of governments wanting to censor ideas that they disagree with. And that's a really big concern. And we're actually seeing government resort to new methods, pressuring private actors, big tech, to censor and restrict the viewpoints of people that they disagree with. So even collusion between government and private actors, which is raising new challenges that we really haven't faced before, at least here in our country. The second thing, of course, is gender ideology. Um, and one example of that is, we have a lot of Title IX litigation going on right now. I actually just argued a case a couple months ago at the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, challenging President Biden's attempt to rewrite Title IX to basically make sex mean gender identity in federal law. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were 5 for 5 in obtaining injunctions or wins against that government overreach. So we're hopeful that when the new administration comes in, that maybe some of those cases will go away, and that Title IX will be interpreted consistent with its original meaning, and provide true protection for women and girls, and the promise of equal opportunity that we've come to love over the past 50 years. So there's certainly a lot of things still to get done on the gender ideology front. And then the third thing is parental rights. We see schools, and this is going to be at the state and local level, not even at the federal level. We have public schools trying to hide information from parents and treat their children as the opposite sex, for example, and sometimes actively deceiving parents. So there's going to be probably a lot of litigation on the parental rights front in the coming years. So those are the three, what we call here red threads at Alliance Defending Freedom, that we are especially alert to in this season.
Gender ideology, global censorship, parental rights.
Yep.
That's kind of what's on the radar screen in the ongoing battle of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, sanctity of life, sanctity of marriage.
Yeah, those are the big deals right now.
Well, Jake, that's super helpful. As you think of your dear wife and all your friends and me and all our friends and people who aren't in the rarefied air of arguing cases with this kind of stuff, how do you say, oh, you know what, if believers would think X or do Y, things could be more helpful in their community or internationally or nationally? Is there any answer to that kind of a question, Jake? Like, what should we be thinking in a different way? Or, I mean, Encounter Grace, we just want to help thinking Christians think clearly. So help us think clearly a little bit about our legal environment.
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways I like to think about it. Of course, as a believer, we know that God is going to advance his kingdom no matter what any court decides or what the law says. The gospel's going to go forward. But we certainly want to be faithful stewards of the gifts that God has given us here. And one gift that he has given us here is a system of government in which we can participate in. We can vote. I certainly hope a lot of your viewers took advantage of that privilege this past November. But voting is a very important privilege we have as Americans to go and vote for good candidates and good laws as we have the opportunity to do so. And just being generally aware and engaged of the laws that are trying to be passed, the threats to people around the country. And really, it's wanting human flourishing. That's what the law is really, I think, supposed to do. It's supposed to promote human flourishing for all people. This is one way that we can love our neighbors well and engaging the system and wanting to promote human flourishing through having good leaders and good laws. And a part of promoting human flourishing is advocating for laws and freedoms that protect not just us and our views, but protect those that we disagree with. We want to be charitable. And part of what we advocate for here at Alliance Defending Freedom is we say things like free speech is for everyone. We don't want the government going after the atheist cake artists, trying to force them to promote a religious message that goes against what they believe. We want freedom for all people. So part of it is being sensitive to what's going on, but also thinking, how can I love my neighbor well? And how you love your neighbor well, part of that is voting for candidates and good laws that respects the freedom for all people. So I think thinking holistically about, why do we engage in government? How can we steward the responsibility that we have been given? Being aware of what's going on. Obviously, that means we need to be picking up good news from good news sources and being aware that way, and then staying engaged. And then probably more important than all of that is praying diligently for our nation's leaders, as the scripture calls us to do. Whether it's the leaders are those of a party that we agree with or disagree with. God has called us to pray for our leaders, for their flourishing, and that they would make good and wise decisions for our nation. And in all that, of course, engaging civilly with those who disagree with us. I think one of the lamentable things over the past few years is there has been a coarsening of civility and debate amongst Americans, whether that's online or otherwise. But it's always important, not only as a matter of our Christian witness, but just being good citizens, to engaging with gentleness and respect and civility as we disagree and try to debate and find the truth and pursue what is right.
I'm working on that in my driving. But you're right. The coarsening of our discourse is very sad. It's to be more civil is a to disagree agreeably and with grace. Well, Jake, I really, really appreciate the work that you do. And I know part of your work is helping to inform and inspire folks like us as we listen. So I'm super thankful for the time you've given to Encounter Grace and our listening community today. But we're really super thankful for your calling and the work that you're doing, putting your heart into it and doing it with utmost of excellence. So
Mm.
thank you, brother.
Well, thank you, Jason. I love you guys. I miss you more than I could ever tell you. It's just a joy to be back on Encounter Grace, and I keep up with you on the podcast and the Sunday morning services, and I really miss being back there with you guys.
Well, it's fun, and you keep visiting, and one day God will bring you back in His timing, and that's the beauty about the sovereignty of God. We just trust Him to move us all around as He wants us.
100%.
Well, give our love to the rest of the gang, and I mean at work there, but also at home.
Absolutely.
And we'll talk again, Jake. Again, thank you so much for being with us, and everybody, thank you for joining in today. And we'll see you here next time.